And another one that tends to drive me nuts when I see it online is the term trauma bonding. People act like this is, an example I just read the other day was people who went through a negative employment experience are trauma bonded with one another. Oh my gosh, no. Trauma bonding is reserved for, pretty horrific shit that people go through, and they feel a bond to their perpetrator. That's not the same thing at all. Welcome to Awake at the Wheel. In this episode, we're going to be exploring current attitudes towards mental health, accessing psychotherapy and therapy, and the fact that there seems to be an overabundance or at least increase in therapy speak in general conversation. So, Oren, I know you and I chat a bit about this amongst ourselves and just noticing that there are certainly positives and negatives to the increased access to mental health. But there's also some, I think, politicization of this, as there seems to be with many different topics these days, that some on one side think that if you access therapy, you're soft or it's overdone, whereas others on the other side seem to think that, it gives them reason or basis or grounds to pathologize everything that they go through.
Yeah, we've really seen an increase in acceptance of psychotherapy, in being able to talk about and to destigmatize mental health issues and getting help for those matters. And especially at the clinic, I think it's amazing that we see so many first responders. So if we're able to help people with that type of mindset, with that type of culture, to be able to connect with, process, and use their emotional experiences, that's great. But at the same time, we don't take a one-size-fits-all approach. We don't take a narrow approach. Sometimes we know that it's better to be able to reflect on and to kind of absorb those feelings and to use them. Other times, like no, we have to suppress them. We need to rely on hardiness, resilience, logic, planning, and so on. So, unfortunately, there are far too many people out there, whether they are influencers, quote unquote, or supposed experts in the field, who are giving only a tiny, narrow slice of what we do. And I think they're giving a distorted view of what we're doing. And too many people are just taking that as gospel, and they are misusing something that could be an amazingly powerful tool, which is psychotherapy, or understanding the human condition, the human mind. And I think a lot of people are either intentionally or unintentionally really not getting a clear, full picture of what can be such an important element of their life.
Yeah, and I'll echo exactly what you said there. Working with a group like first responders and even military who have historically been told, suck it up and move on, to see that group of people, there's such a far greater acceptance of accessing therapy and working on these things. It's amazing. But I think that, on the other side of it, there's this pop culture influence of therapy being fashionable. So I'm not necessarily speaking of the clinical population here. I kind of want to separate and disseminate the two. But there's this, amongst the younger generation, it appears that, going to therapy is, quote, the thing to do. So like so many things in life, I think that it's a matter of balance, but I'm of two minds on it, because I think that preventative psychotherapy can be incredibly valuable, right? So rather than addressing the problem when there's a problem, gain the tools and perspective beforehand so you can cope when things come up. But what are your thoughts on this kind of pop culture shift as far as therapy appearing to be fashionable?
Well, I have many patients who, maybe partly because of that, or partly because of their own insecurities, they feel almost guilty. They think like, this is such a privilege, it's such a luxury, it's a trendy thing to do. And I'm like, no, you have some serious issues here, and I'm glad that you found the honesty and courage to try to, to seek out help and try to work on it. So yeah, I'm seeing this, let's say, this perspective on therapy really having a bunch of negative impacts on people. And yes, if you're going to therapy just because it's trendy or it's the thing to do, or you don't understand that going to therapy, if you're doing good therapy, is a lot of hard work. And I say this to patients all the time: it gets worse before it gets better, because we're going to, again, I'm talking good therapy. I mean, sometimes there's different types of therapy. Sometimes it's just simple solution focused. You have a problem at work, do A, B, and C. Sometimes just simple coaching or counseling is sufficient. But if you want to do the deep work that we do in therapy, you have to be prepared to dig into places that you've been avoiding for much of your life, or you've been lying to yourself about, you've been distorting, you've been using, allowing defense mechanisms to help you see reality not clearly, because it helps you sleep better at night. And if I can just, my mentor, he used to say this. He said, when people come to therapy, and it's a bit of hyperbole, but there's a lot of merit to it. He said, when people come to therapy to say, I really want to make like deep, lasting, meaningful changes in myself, he's saying what they really mean is, I want to come to therapy and I want you to wave your magic wand and somehow
Yeah.
turn the world back to when my defense mechanisms were working better and I didn't see reality as clearly as I'm seeing it now. And one more thing I say in therapy is, I say that when people come to therapy, sometimes it again depends on who the person is, depends on what the issues are, what the circumstances are. But for some people, like, yeah, they really enjoy having, let's say, engaging discussions. They like to be able to talk where I'm not going to interrupt. They like to have sometimes high level conversations, and sometimes it's exciting, it's fun, it's invigorating, and so on. And they look forward to coming back. That's great.
Hmm.
But when they start not wanting to come back, I say that is a sign that we've hit on something that is uncomfortable. And if it's uncomfortable, then it's probably the right thing. We're digging into places that, again, you didn't want to go, you haven't wanted to go for a long time. So I tell people that when you start not wanting to go to therapy, when you would move heaven and earth to get to therapy, but now suddenly, well, you know what? I'm not sure if I can come this week. Well, why not? Well, Rogers tech guy said he's coming between the hours of 12 and 4 on Monday. And you never know, maybe he won't come on Monday. So I should just book off the whole week just to be safe, right? You're finding every excuse not to come. I say, A, that's a sign again that we're hitting something deep and meaningful. And B, that's the best time, the most important time to make sure you do everything in your power to come, because again, we're making progress here. And C, one thing I say is, if a therapist finds that people are not wanting to come really early on, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing a great job. Maybe you just suck as a therapist and they don't want to come because they don't want to be with you. So,
Yeah.
everything has two sides, at least two sides. So I don't want to give bad therapists an excuse. I don't want them saying, oh yeah, I'm so good. After one session, people don't want to come. So I'm really hitting, deep. No, maybe you just really suck.
Yeah, and I hate to say, but that's certainly a possibility, that is the case, or maybe they're the wrong fit, or there's any number of
Right.
reasons. But ultimately, I love the point that you made there, that usually when we as therapists, as good therapists, come against some resistance, it's probably because we've touched on a nerve there. But as far as something you said earlier, the weaponization of therapy. I think that's a really important thing for us to highlight as well, that sometimes we see this amongst couples, for example, where they're coming to therapy to prove the other one wrong. Or, even individually, they go and seek out therapy to tell their friend or their family member or their partner, well, I did therapy and, I'm fine now. It's you that's the problem. So that's certainly a big problem, as a big issue as well, which really cheapens, I think, the profession and the reason for accessing therapy.
Right. And I've always told, especially with couples or families, I go, look, use me as a tool. I don't mind being called a tool in that context. Don't use me as a weapon. And I've
Yeah.
seen people do that, whether it's in couples or family therapy or individual therapy. And, the person says, hey, what happened in therapy? And the person says, well, my therapist said, and I say, look, I have a thick skin. If your partner or family member, whoever, doesn't like what I say, I'm fine with that. But if you've misrepresented what I've said, whether the words or the intention, I say that's on you, and that's not going to help you. So yeah, we have to be honest, and we have to have let's say, a deep, full understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing or what we're saying. And again, a lot of people, as you're saying with the pop culture and so on, a lot of people really are, because they have access to so much information, they are, let's say, taking a really complex or a concept or a situation that is fraught with potential damage and harm, and they don't have the ability to fully understand it, to analyze it, to use it. Yet they're trying to. It's like it's like having a child who can build bridges with Lego, and then someone says, "Okay, well, let's have them build a real bridge." Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not trying to denigrate or insult anybody. I'm not trying to say that we have this special knowledge, but sometimes certain concepts, okay, or again, content are, let's say, they they have a different meaning depending on how you look at it, or depending on your experience with it or your knowledge with it. And if you use it the wrong way, it can do more harm than good. And I see so many people online doing that. They're oversimplifying something, or they're using terms like empath. Right, that thing drives me. If I can just go on a quick tangent here, if
Yeah.
that's okay, that drives me crazy. This term empath, where people say, "Oh yeah, I'm an empath," and I saw it online. And what it really means is, and I'm not shitting on anybody who has this,
Yeah.
but right, really, I say to people, if you think you're an empath, it just means you have poor boundaries. You have poor internal boundaries, like
Yeah.
you have a hard time connecting with or dealing with your own internal processes. And you have poor boundaries with other people. If someone tells you a sad story and you have compassion for them, maybe it makes you sad. That's perfectly fine. Even if you feel like you're crying with them, fine. Not if you're a therapist, if you're a friend. But if it's so overwhelming that you can't sleep for days, that doesn't make you a better person. That means you're
No.
not able to tolerate and contain the discomfort that comes with being a good person and hearing somebody out and so on. And then now you're making it about you and so on. So, and by the way, for some people, it's because of experience. Maybe it's trauma. Maybe it's poor attachment. Whatever the case may be. And for others, it's also your mirror neurons. That's empathy. So, for anyone who doesn't know about mirror neurons, if somebody yawns, someone else is going to yawn usually. That's so if I see someone else doing something or going through something, my mirror neurons make me sort of on some level by proxy experience to some degree what they're experiencing. That's why if you're watching a TV show like Extra, I think, with Ricky Gervais, or The Office, where someone's in a really awkward, uncomfortable situation, we cringe. We're not in that
Mm-hmm.
situation, but we're just watching it. We cringe. Those are mirror neurons. So some people have very low functioning. Those are people with no empathy. It could be psychopaths. And other people have it on a very high level, and they're hypersensitive to that. So I'm not shitting on people like that. Okay, that's just but you have to recognize that. Anyway, I kind of went off on a tangent, but that's again this term empath, which is
Yeah.
being glorified, or it's being or being pathologized, or whatever. Again, these are terms, concepts, what have you, that are being promulgated by people who really, in many cases, just don't have the knowledge or wherewithal
Yeah.
to communicate it properly.
And I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, that, we don't necessarily have special knowledge, but we do, right? You
Correct.
went to school for 10 plus years. I went to school for 7 years. Like we certainly do have special knowledge, which allows us to
Sure.
guide people through these things. And I think that's part of the confusion arises from, and not amongst us, of course, but I mean the general population. To use your bridge analogy, right? Everybody who plays with Lego can't build a bridge, but everyone feels and perhaps promotes the fact that just because we all have a mind, we're all experts. It's just certainly not the case. And with regard to empaths, you gave such a great example there that, we may have this amazing ability to feel what others are feeling, but it's about self-regulation and knowing what to do with those emotions when they come up, not falling apart. And another one that tends to drive me nuts when I see it online is the term trauma bonding. People act like this is, an example I just read the other day was people who went through a negative employment experience are trauma bonded with one another. Oh my gosh, no. Trauma bonding is reserved for, pretty horrific shit that people go through, and they feel a bond to their perpetrator. That's not the same thing at all. It's such a misuse of the word. And of course, there's other contexts, but just for example, those are two very different things. And the danger in this, and we spoke about this in our Words Have Meaning podcast, that when we misuse words like this and we twist their meaning, they lose meaning.
Exactly. They lose meaning, and then it becomes harmful because now two different people think they're talking about the same thing,
Yeah.
but they're not.
Yeah.
So, yes. And I know you and I were talking before about some examples of where everybody is, an expert, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's a therapist. And if I can just say a couple of things about that. Many, many years ago, a former professor who became a friend of mine, he had written a book, and I'm going to mangle it a little bit. But at the beginning of his book, he wrote something along the lines of, he said, I don't tell people I'm a psychologist because let's see, I think he told a story, he's on an airplane, and someone said, "Oh, you're a psychologist." So they said, "Let me tell you my problem." And they tell him the problem, and they say, "What do you think?" And he tells them, using, he's not analyzing them, of course, he's not giving professional help, but he gave them an insight based on his knowledge and experience. And he told them that, and they're basically like, "Nah, I don't think so." And then they told him, what they thought about it. And
Yeah.
he said, if you went to a doctor or a friend who happens to be a doctor, and you say, "Hey, I've got this pain in my shoulder. What do you think?" And they tell you, most people aren't going to go, "Nah." Or sorry, previously they didn't
Right.
go, "Nah, I don't." Right now,
Yeah.
since with COVID and everything, and not trusting the science, now people are going to go, "No, no, no. You know what? I read on Google MD or whatever, that I think it's this or that." So in fact, the analogy breaks used to be apt, where we would say, you trusted medical doctors, but not psychologists or
Right.
psychotherapists, right? But now it's, nobody trusts the science, and it's good to be a critical thinker. It's
Of
good to be
course.
skeptical, right? And it's good to say, well, you know what? Maybe I want to do a bit of my own due diligence and so on. But I'm just seeing such an arrogance, the Dunning-Kruger effect, where there's a large gap. The people who know the least think that they know the most, and
Mhm.
so far too many people now think that they are an expert because they have access to all of this on the internet, which is great that we have it. But look, if I have access to even AI, if people are thinking, okay, I'm going to write apps, I'm going to write code, and all this stuff. No, if you don't have the basic abilities to do these things, AI is just a magical tool that you're not going to be able to use, or you can use it to have a little chat with somebody online, but you're not going to be able to do these amazing things that people with more knowledge and abilities can do. So it's important to be humble enough to know what we do and do not know, and what we can
Mhm.
and cannot do.
Yeah, for sure. And it comes back to the fact that access to information doesn't equate to knowledge, right?
Right.
So I feel that there is such an overabundance of information about these topics out there, but that doesn't mean that everybody who's consuming it has the ability to ingest that and make it be knowledge that they have. And what I mean is that, again, there's expertise, and then there's just reading about something and developing some understanding of it.
Right.
And as far as, everyone being an expert, it's a really tricky one too, back to what you were saying before, where two people can then look at the same situation very differently and perhaps erroneously. I'm reminded of the ink blot test, right? Where, you two people can look at the same thing and there may be a general similarity in understanding, but you can indeed see two very different things. And back to the fact of, not having the proper knowledge, if we're looking at things very differently, we're going to misinterpret it, and that perpetuates misinformation in the world.
Right. And I want to be very clear here. This is not us with thin skin saying, why is everyone thinking they can do our job?
No,
It's not that.
no,
No. All
no.
right. And again, I like again, the humility part. And I said to my students and patients, some of the best quote unquote psychologists are, let's say, salespeople. Through experience, they learn to
Mm-hmm.
read people. They learn to tell
Yeah.
them what they need to hear, and so on. And they can sell really well. And a lot of psychology was based on models from the business world, from the sales world, and so on. So I'm not saying that, again, as you say, we have, through our education, we have specialized knowledge and everything like that. It doesn't make us special people. It means we
No.
have certain insights and certain information that others don't have. And in our field, I know many people who are very knowledgeable, but they're terrible therapists. I know
Mm-hmm.
many people who have all the skills of, let's say, CBT. They can do it perfectly. They know exactly, this issue. Here's how you do it, steps, A through Z. But they are horrible, let's say, therapists, because they can't connect with people, and they don't, they don't have the other tools that are needed. So I want to be very clear on this. This is not to, I'm not trying to elevate us and put us on a pedestal or anything like that. I think what people hear every episode, I have my little drinking game. Okay. I think humility is called for, which anyone who knows me, they're going to laugh and think that's the most ironic statement he can say, because I am not known for my humility. But through let's say certain experience I've had not that long ago, it was basically forced upon me, this need to be more humble, to recognize what I know and do not know, or can and cannot do. And so when I say humility, again, I understand it might sound ironic for people who know me, but I am trying my best to embrace that concept.
So I think that an argument perhaps to what we're saying is, well, isn't it a good thing that people are more aware of their mental health and more aware of psychology and how that can impact people? Of course it is.
Sure.
The more we understand, the more understanding we have of others, the better. But like we talk about in many of our episodes, I think that what happens is, again, the over pathologizing of these different terms and disorders, and people saying that they have something that they don't. And I think what that leads to is, again, this, everyone look at me, I'm going through this, accommodate me, I'm a victim, and so on and so forth. So I think that that's the danger that maybe arises with this.
Yes, and not only over pathologizing, but how about over glorifying? So, one of the
Yes.
worst trends I've seen, and I'm mortified, is when people are saying, "Let me tell you about my latest borderline experience."
Mm,
And, whether whether they have borderline personality disorder or not, especially if they do have it, this is somebody who is talking about something intimate, something maybe humiliating, shameful, and they're putting it out there because they're seeing other people talk about their supposed borderline moments and so on. And so they're modeling it, and they don't understand. Once it's out there forever. And you know, like and to be able to talk about a therapist with that, that's great, or even a close
of
friend,
course. Yeah.
right? So that you don't carry shame. But I have many issues of my, up here and in my life that, I might share with a friend, but I'm not going to tell the public. I'm not going to let that be
No.
used against me. And so I've seen that happen so often. That's terrifying. Again, it goes back to social media. It goes back to the influence of we're social animals, so monkey see monkey do. So many people, if it's being normalized, if they see their favorite influencer talk about their personal experiences and they don't have the critical thinking capacity to say, well, they've made that decision, or maybe they're doing that for some marketing purpose or something like that, or they've about it really well and they're prepared to take that risk and share that information. If they don't have that reflection and that insight, to be able to decide whether it's best for them as well to do that. In most cases, it's not, right?
Hmm.
They truly are perhaps setting themselves up for some really horrific consequences.
Yeah, and that's such an important thing that, everyone's situation is unique and certainly we can learn from others' experiences, but my experience doesn't equal your experience and so on. Um, and I think what this translates into in many contexts as well is, the observation of celebrities and, everyone jumping in and giving their 2 cents whenever there's, something going on. But I'm especially noticing that it's coming from the psychological perspective that, oh, they must have X, Y, and Z, and that's why they're
Right.
behaving that way.
Yeah. Okay. And that's why I tell people when they ask me, they toss diagnoses around.
Mm-hmm.
And, I say, look, a diagnosis is important for certain, in certain contexts, for certain reasons, certain purposes. But to just throw a term out there and to think that that does justice to the person or to the situation, or B, to think that everyone understands what you're saying. Like if someone says narcissist, well, there are many different aspects of narcissism. And are we talking about narcissistic traits? Are we talking about narcissistic personality disorder? There are so many different elements. So when we don't have precision, I've talked about this with words have meaning. When
Yeah.
we use these words without precision and without full understanding, and without, let's say, appreciation for the potential impact, once again, we're doing more harm than good.
Yeah, so speaking of specific examples in the media, I want to talk a little bit about it's been a couple of weeks now, but the situation with the leaked text messages with Jonah Hill and his ex girlfriend. So it's my understanding that these were from 2021. But for anyone who isn't familiar, I'll read out some of what it entailed. So basically, the premise of this was Jonah Hill was expressing to his girlfriend his distaste in some of her online presence and postings and things like that. And the internet went insane. So I want to look at this from kind of two perspectives. I want to view it from the perspective of, what some of the commentary made was, but then I want to look at it from the psychological perspective in terms of, not necessarily Jonah, because we don't know him, but what would we do in the context of such messages with one of our patients or clients? So the message reads, and we're going to post this in the description of the YouTube video as well, a link to it. But essentially, he says, plain and simple, if you need surfing with men, boundaryless, inappropriate friendships with men, to model, to post pictures of yourself in a bathing suit, to post sexual pictures, friendships with women who are in unstable places and from your wild recent past, beyond getting a lunch or coffee or something respectful. And then he goes on to say, so if these criteria are for you, then I am not the right partner for you. If these things bring you to a place of happiness, I support it, and there will be no hard feelings. These are my boundaries for romantic partners. And then he goes on to say, my boundaries with you are based on the ways that these actions have hurt our trust. So I'm assuming he's referring to things that have happened in the relationship in the past, and these are the boundaries that he set. So some of the reactions that are out there and some of the responses that are out there in terms of, this message exchange is that he's abusive, he's controlling, he's disgusting. I've read that some think that he was trying to make her smaller. These are not boundaries, and this is control. This is emotional abuse. He's a misogynist. And the list just goes on. There's, tons and tons of opinions on this. So I certainly have my opinion, but Oren, what do you think, first of all, about boundaries and them being set out that way and the response from the public about it?
Okay, well, once again, drinking game, humiliation. Okay, or humility, not humiliation, geez, humility. That's interesting slip there. Because I think it was humiliating. So you said earlier about the ink blot test. This and so many stories are the perfect every time. It's like the Rorschach ink blot test. You can tell so much about a person based on how they interpret an ambiguous situation. This is ambiguous. We don't have all the context, and everybody who commented on this took, there's a couple of things. I'm going to throw out a bunch of terms here, and feel free to jump in if I go too far. Okay. There's two types of projection. One is the defense mechanism of projection, where somebody cannot accept or handle their own negative or distasteful or violent or aggressive, sexual, whatever, thoughts, feelings, urges, impulses, right? So they disavow them unconsciously, they repress them, and then they project them onto others. So I don't think that. It must be other people. I'm not a racist. Everybody else is racist, right? That's projection. And the worst form of projection is gaslighting. So that's one type. But the second type of projection is something we all do. And I tell this to my students all the time. So I say, imagine, and I hope everyone will do this. Okay, this will be, we haven't done this for a while. I'm going to give you a little task here. So imagine it's 2:00 in the morning and you get a text, because with text, all you're seeing is words. You're not getting any tone, right? And it's funny, by the way, when I love when people are reading out emails or texts and they imbue the text with all this tone, like, and then my partner said, "Oh, don't you want that?" I was like, no,
they
maybe
emphasize
right,
where they feel that there should be emphasis. Yeah.
Right. I said, no, it's don't you want that? Okay, it's all you can infer. You don't know how they said. Anyway, so the second type of, so here's the message I'm going to give that, or the example I'm going to give that highlights the second type. So it's 2:00 in the morning and your best friend texts you, I've been at the corner of a certain street, for the past 4 hours and my partner didn't show up. Okay, it's 2 a.m. So I've been here from 10 till 2 a.m. and my partner didn't show up. And then I say to students, I say, okay, what would your initial reaction be? What would your thoughts be? What would you text that person? Right. And I've asked this to thousands of people. It's fascinating to see their responses. Okay. Because that's a projective test. And most people, it's interesting because some people say, I'd tell them, what's wrong with you? And even if they don't say that, you can tell in their facial reaction and their tone that they're disgusted at the person. Why would you wait for so long?
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, a lot of people say that. Okay.
My first thought is, oh my gosh, are you okay?
Okay. And that's, again, it's fascinating that some people will do that. Are you okay? Right. Others are like, what can I do for you? Do you want me to come get you or come over here and stuff like, right. And it tells you about the person. Right. Their response. And that's the crux of the projective testing, like the Rorschach ink blot test and other tests that I used to use when I did assessments. So, that's a whole other episode we can do. But the point is, right. And by the way, and then there's always the tiny percentage of people who would say, oh, I hope the other person's okay. Like, did something happen? That's almost never the first response. So what I'm saying is people in that situation, they project their own experience, desires, wants, whatever, into the other person's experience. And so instead of asking the right questions, like, tell me more, what's going on, stuff like that, they will respond to the person in the way that they would want others to respond to them.
Or probably based on their experiences, right? So those who say like, oh, what an a-hole, why didn't they show up? I imagine that has something to do with what they've been through.
Right. And it doesn't have to be with a partner themselves. It can be, with family members, whatever else, right? So exactly. And so what I tell people is the opposite of that, opposite of projection is empathy. And then I ask people, what's the best definition of empathy? And most people, and if they don't get it, I go involving footwear. So people say, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And what I say is, no. Okay, and I actually made that mistake when I was training with I'll give his name, Dr. Les Greenberg. He was a professor, and I trained under him for a while. He's one of the creators of emotion-focused therapy. So one day, sorry, it's a little bit of a tangent here, but one day I told him I was volunteering at a thing called the Distress Center. We would get calls from people, and I was doing an overnight shift. And I said, look, I've heard so many terrible calls, so many horrible experiences and so on. And, I'm being empathetic, compassionate, whatever. I said, but this one time a person was telling me about this experience. And for whatever reason, maybe because it was 4 a.m, I'd been up all night, I'm dealing with this, who knows? But I said, in that moment, they were telling me about this horrific experience. I said, I actually started feeling almost terror. Like I felt their terror. I said, oh my God, I said, I've never had such an empathetic response. And he looked at me, and I can't do a South African accent, his beautiful South African accent, but he just looked at me with disdain and said, that's not empathy. I said, what? He goes, that's not empathy, feeling someone else's, experience. I go, well, then what is? And he said, empathy is, and this is the example he gave, he said, it's not putting yourself in someone else's shoes. He said, it's trying to imagine what it must be like in that person's shoes. And he's saying it's understanding their perspective. So it's not feeling their pain or whatever. But there are different types of empathy. Some people say 3. I'm just going to say 2. There is the emotional empathy. So yeah, where someone has a horrifying experience and you feel that, okay, that's emotional empathy. And that's what the empaths feel, quote unquote empaths. And I always tell people, I say, if you're saying you're an empath or you have that type of empathy, I say, like, I'm sounding like a jerk when I say it. And I don't say this to patients this way. I go, but congratulations, you have the emotional functioning of a baby. Okay, because babies have emotional empathy. If a baby hears another baby cry, that baby cries. Okay, so I say that's just emotional. The cognitive empathy, the deeper level empathy, again, the trying to understand the other person's perspective. So if someone texts me at 2 o'clock in the morning, they've been there for 4 hours, I know my original response. I know what I would be thinking about. I know what I would do in that situation. But the truly empathetic thing would be to think, what about that person? What about their experience, about their psychological functioning, their personality? What would make them stay there for 4 hours, right? Without judgment. It's not a judgment call. It's just, I'm trying to understand what about them would allow themselves to subject themselves to that, or allow them to subject themselves to that, and what might they be thinking or feeling? Not what I would in that situation, because when you put yourself in someone else's shoes, all you're doing is you're putting yourself in that context.
Right.
But you're seeing it through your own lens. Truly, again, so that because people think it's just semantics. No, these are very different statements. Besides, again, it's imagining what it's like in their shoes.
Because empathy is not about us; it's about the other person.
Exactly, it's about understanding the perspective. And that's why I say, like, for example, true narcissists. I say they can't see the other person's perspective. If it aligns with how they would be in that situation, then they can predict. Okay, but they don't think about the other person's actual perspective. What drives them? What might they be going through, and so on. Not what I think, but what trying to understand what they are, experiencing.
Join us for the continuation of this conversation next week on Awake at the Wheel.
As much as we love listening to ourselves speak, especially me, we would love to hear from you as well. So our emails are in the description below. If you would please write to us with your questions, feedback, comments, topics that you'd like us to cover. We can do this together, the two of us, but it's much better if we do it together. So we look forward to hearing from you, and we are going to have a segment called Rounds Table, where we're going to discuss the feedback and the questions and so on from our audience, and we will take it to the next level. We're going to help you be able to deal with some of these issues that you might be bringing us, or it's going to be a topic for us to explore together. And we really look forward to building a community of like-minded people who want to do right by others, not just for themselves.